Did you know that in the 1950s, the US Navy conducted a secret biological warfare experiment on the people of San Francisco? They sprayed harmful bacteria into the air just to see how vulnerable a city like San Francisco would be to a biowarfare attack. Operation Sea Spray was a 1950 US Navy secret biological warfare experiment in which Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii bacteria were sprayed over the San Francisco Bay Area in California in order to determine how vulnerable a city like San Francisco may be to a bioweapon attack. Starting on September 20th, 1950, and continuing until September 27th, the US Navy released the two types of bacteria from a ship off of the shore of San Francisco, believing them to be harmless to humans. Based on results from monitoring equipment at 43 locations around the city, the Army determined that San Francisco had received enough of a dose for nearly all of the city's 800,000 residents to inhale at least 5,000 of the particles. Then on October 11th, 1950, 11 people checked into the Stanford Hospital in San Francisco with very rare and serious urinary tract infections. One of those patients died 3 weeks later with a heart valve infection. No wonder this experiment was kept so secret. Well, fast forward 27 years, and did you know that the United Nations held a convention prohibiting the use of environmental modification techniques? Convention on the Prohibition of the Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques, New York, December 10th, 1976. The Environmental Modification Convention, formerly the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques, is an international treaty prohibiting the military or other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. It opened for signature on May 18, 1977 in Geneva, and it entered into force on October 5, 1978. The convention bans weather warfare, which is the use of weather modification techniques for the purposes of inducing damage or destruction. The Convention on Biological Diversity of 2010 would also ban some forms of weather modification or geoengineering, which can also be described as solar radiation modification. Fast forward once again now to 2024, and here we are doing it all over again, in secret again. Just earlier this month, some scientists from the University of Washington conducted yet another secretive experiment on the people of San Francisco. In a very clandestine manner, they started up a high-powered spraying machine. They then sent microscopic salt aerosol particles directly into the morning San Francisco air. The trial was supposedly meant to test how far these particles could travel outside of a lab. And they did this as a precursor to a future experiment where they plan to artificially brighten clouds. A secretive experiment released salt crystals over San Francisco Bay. Could it help curb warming? The technology could make clouds reflect more sunlight, cooling the earth below. That sounds an awful lot like geoengineering to me, and some might say that's not a very bright idea. Not such a bright idea. Cooling the Earth by reflecting sunlight back to space is a dangerous distraction. The United Nations Environment Assembly this week considered a resolution on solar radiation modification, which refers to controversial technologies intended to mask the heating effect of greenhouse gases by reflecting some sunlight back to space. Proponents argue the technologies will limit the effects of climate change, but in reality, this type of geoengineering risks further destabilizing an already deeply disturbed climate system. What's more, its full impacts cannot be known until after deployment. So now they're basically pushing chemtrails for climate change, even though the whole notion of man-made climate change is absolutely absurd. So if all this talk of geoengineering is new to you, I want to leave you today with an interview that I did with the former Premier of British Columbia, Bill Vander Zalm, who did everything he could to legally stop geoengineering from happening. Now, I made this video over a decade ago, so I apologize for the music in it. It was written and performed by me, but hopefully it's not too distracting to the important information that Bill Vandersam has presented here. So that's all for today. If you guys appreciate my efforts to bring you this information, please check the top link in the description below for pressfortruth.ca/donate. This work can only be done with your support. Alright guys, so without further ado, here's my interview from 11 years ago with the former Premier of British Columbia, Bill Vandersam, about chemtrails and geoengineering. We're here with Bill Vandersam, former Premier of British Columbia, and obviously we have the chemtrail rally and the global geoengineering rally going on, and you've been outspoken about that lately, but what got you into wanting to cover these types of issues that is really fighting for the freedom of the people of BC?
My wife, Lillian's been bugging me about this. She watches the sky and she sees what obviously aren't contrails. I don't think there's anybody that has looked at the sky with a bit of brains and thought and fairness that could argue that something isn't happening that wasn't happening before. Contrails were something that followed a trail, condensation trails from an airplane, that were narrow and dissipated very quickly. Chemtrails go from horizon to horizon and they spread. And they crisscross and they go next to one another, and pretty soon the whole sky is cloudy. And we don't know who's doing it. We don't know what it is they're putting into the sky. We think it's aluminum, borium, and strontium, but we don't know for sure. No one talks. Governments don't tell us, and they have to know. They can't do that in the sky above us without the provincial and the federal government being aware. So we know something's happening. Few people will deny that something's happening. No one knows exactly what's happening. So I took the initiative at the urging of my friends, and I saw these what I believe to be chemtrails, not only here, but in Palm Springs and any place where you're near an airport. They tend to see more of it because I guess it's convenient. And it's also, we are told, only in NATO countries. It's not in China, it's not in any of those Asian countries, it's not in Russia, it's not in India, it's in all of the NATO countries. North America, Western Europe, that's where it is. So we think maybe it's a NATO initiative, but again, we don't know. So I took this step a few weeks ago to spell it all out. What contrails or what I thought them to be, and I admitted that I don't know everything about it or little about it. I spelled it out as best I could, and I said, okay, government, come clean. Provincial government, federal government, freedom of information, tell us what's happening. You know what's happening. And if you think there's nothing happening, then say so. At least we'll know where we stand. And they'll know that we're watching. That's the benefit. I also wrote municipalities in case the province and the federal government tends to ignore us, as they might, or delay things, hoping it'll go away. I wrote all the municipal governments, all the regional districts, all the cities, and I said, I want you to pass a resolution to say that no foreign particles for climate control be spread in the sky above your jurisdiction. And I think municipal governments, at least a good many of them, should be supportive of that, because why would local government close to the people agree to something being spread in the sky? So even if they thought it wasn't happening, it would be difficult for them to say, we're not going to pass the resolutions. I think the people are being left out of the process. Government has lost complete contact with the people. It's a mess. And the average person out there, if you ask them, do you really trust the government? They'll say no. A whole lot of them, a large percentage. Whether it's here or Ontario or elsewhere in Canada, I think a lot of people have lost their trust in government, which is really sad, because the government is supposed to be there to represent the people. They're elected to do things on our behalf and to communicate with us. That's all gone. I think the best thing that's happened is the internet. We're getting information out that never used to get out. It's no longer one-sided. It's no longer dictated from some elite group. So that's good. So I think that's going to make a difference. So it's all of those things. It's a whole combination of things. So I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad to see this will be reported on media. I'm glad there's a demonstration tomorrow. I don't know, it may be that there's some good explanation from government for what's happening, but they haven't been forthcoming. We don't know, and that's bad.
Do you have any advice for anybody who wants to get involved in this kind of a movement, wants to continue after today, after all the global rallies in the coming days and months and weeks from now? What should people do to get involved in this fight?
Okay, well, go and find an anti-chemtrail movement in their own cities.
Once you acknowledge about the chemtrail spraying, I think most people feel that they should try to do something. The ocean is just full of one little drops of water, but together they're a huge ocean, and there's no hope to stop this unless people do get involved.
There certainly is talking about it and bringing the conversation up on a regular basis to new people. There's, of course, great websites. There's one here in Vancouver and local groups and chat groups. If you get 1, 2, 3 new people or somewhere this week, the stars will align and somebody will have heard something here about chemtrails, and then they'll look up and see them and their kid says something to them about it. That's, I guess, how this has to go.
We need people who know about this stuff, the people who work at airports, the people who work in the chemical industry, in the military-industrial complex, to come forward. You know, are we liars? Are we kookies? Or is there something going on?
It's our sky, it's our sun, it pertains to everyone, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, this country's having a war over here, I don't give a shit about it. It's like, we need to be aware of this because it's death from above, man.
Hopefully we'll be able to raise awareness of the chemtrails just that little bit more, and that's all we can hope for. Because I can only think that if everybody knew that this was happening, it couldn't happen.
When there's a protest, even if you question the protest, whether it's decriminalizing marijuana or whether it's HSD or smart meters, or as we see it in Vancouver tomorrow and other cities across North America, to protest chemtrails, participate. That sends a message to all people in government that, hey, you know what? We're being watched. People do care. They're wanting to get involved. We got to be a little more careful. I think people have to become more involved. If you don't want to be led down the garden path, if you don't want to end up being totally controlled, you better get involved now. Get involved one way or another. Ask your politicians. Make them answer the questions. Get involved.